My name is Renata. I am talking with Renata, show host. The show is meant for parents, but not only. The show is meant for everyone who is interested into what's happening behind the scenes, who wants to go deeper and to see what's hiding behind the behavior, our children's behavior, our partner's behavior, our friends' behavior. We gather once a week with wonderful speakers from all around the world, and we explore the topics of life itself, the purpose it has, the meaning, the consciousness, what's behind the relationship and the dynamics. And I am super excited to introduce our today's guest to all of you in just a couple of moments. So I am thrilled to be here today with Thomas Campbell. Thomas is a physicist, author and expert on consciousness, author of the My Big Toe trilogy, and international speaker. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Renata. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so excited to be here with you today. And I'm going to tell briefly my story with your book, related to your book. So that was maybe 15 years ago. I was having a very sad day, and I was hiding it. So I didn't want anyone to know that I was sad. And we were on vacation in Florida. And, there was this cool guy who brings towels. When he brought us towels and he was doing small chat, and I was like, oh, not today. Like, I really don't want to talk. And I just wanted to give out towels and then, leave.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he looked again and was like, why is he doing that? And he just said, you know what? It's going to feel strange maybe because we are strangers, but still I want to tell something to you. And he said, there is this one book that saved my life. And I don't know if you're interested in reading, if you read books at all. Maybe it's not my business, but just, in case you want to check out this book, it's called My Big Toe, and you can find it online. And that's what I did. I came back home, I found your book, I read it, and it's like I felt home. It's like everything I knew or suspected about life on some intuitive level, but I didn't have any knowledge to back it. Just I had this gut feeling that, there is this bigger picture. And then I was reading your book written from a scientific approach. I was like, oh, that's my proof. That's my proof. There it is. I have it. I have. So it felt so, home. And I felt relieved too, because it obviously that broadened my perspective too on so many things, but it also confirmed what I already knew on some intuitive level that I could never ever explain or have any knowledge for it. So thank you for that. I really deeply appreciate your book. And when I started organizing those, discussions about, things that really matter in life, like are we being conscious and how we live our lives? Are we living our lives, or are we just driven by some internal beliefs? I remembered your book and was like, so I need to contact Thomas Campbell and we need to talk about it because it really made a big impact on my life. So I want to share it with everyone who's listening. So welcome and thank you for doing that. And what's your story with your book?
Well, I'll try not to make this too long because this isn't really the subject today, but I was a kind of a normal physicist, believing that the world is no more than what you can measure. That's called it's materialism, but it's an operational definition of reality. If you can perform an operation on something, if you can measure it, if you can interact with it, then it's real. And if you can't interact with it, then, well, what good is it? If you can't interact with it, it's not real. It's doesn't exist. And I felt that way up until a point that I learned how to meditate. And shortly after learning how to meditate, I found that I could solve problems in my mind. I could find errors in my software that I was writing in my mind without even looking at the cards. In those days, it was punch cards. This is a long time ago. And debugging was very difficult because sometimes the errors were just errors in the card punch. The card, the thing that punched the hole would be just slightly off center. So there's no way that I could know that. There was no way that I could be possibly aware of that. But those lines would light up for me, and that would be one that's wrong. And I'd say, what's wrong with it? There's nothing wrong with that line. That's perfectly good code. But then I'd go repunch that card, and sure enough, it would work. So that told me that reality was more than just what you can measure, because this was unmeasurable. This was in another realm of reality that I didn't know anything about. So that just opened my mind dramatically. And I started, wanting to understand it. Well, if there's this, what physics does is models reality. That's what physicists do. They model reality. And here was this another part of reality that I knew was real, and I wanted to model it. I wanted to understand it. So that's kind of what started me on this trip. And then I ran into Bob Monroe, and he's the guy that wrote Journeys Out of the Body. And he had a lab for studying consciousness, and he was a real honest guy. He wasn't just making stuff up to sell books. And anyway, so I started working in the lab with him, trying to understand consciousness. And eventually I thought I did understand it enough to write a book, which is what the book that you read was really a book. Is a model of consciousness and how consciousness works and what consciousness is and where does it come from, and what's important in life. Why am I here? What should I be doing? It answers all those questions. And then I realized a couple of years after I published the book that I could derive physics from that same understanding. I could understand how quantum physics worked. And scientists today can't understand quantum physics. They say it's just weird science, but this model lets you understand it. It lets you understand, relativity too. And physicists today don't understand why the speed of light ought to be a constant. That's something that mystifies them. A lot of things mystify scientists today, things we call paradoxes. We know they're true, but we don't have any idea why they should be that way. And this model solves all those problems. And then I started looking in other fields, and it solves problems in biology and psychology and sociology and philosophy and metaphysics and ontology and epistemology and all of those areas of study. This solves those problems. So it really is a theory of everything. And it not only ends up creating a better, more general model of the physical world, physics, but it also creates a scientific model of the subjective world, the world of mind and feeling and thought. So if you're having problems, if you're having issues, if you're sad and unhappy or whatever, it will tell you why. And it will tell you what you need to do to stop feeling that way. Now, it's not always easy to do that, but at least you can understand why it is, why you are the way you are, and why you feel the way you feel. So this is an objective model of the subjective world, which is something new that we haven't had before. So I'm glad my book helped you. I'm very glad that you read it, and it's not an easy thing to read. It's a book that takes some effort and some you have to stick to it and just keep reading, because it's very dense. It has lots and lots of meaning in almost every sentence. And if you just read it like normal people read normal books, you won't get that much out of it. You have to really read a little bit and think about it a while, and then just read a little bit more and think about it a while. And it's a difficult read. So I'm impressed that you had the stamina to read it in English, which is not your native language.
Exactly. But that's how I read it. It was a slow read, and when I was always, as you suggest to do in this book, you tell that to the reader that you we have to read what you have written in this book and to compare it to our perspective and to question it, like, is it true? How does it true to me? Is it really true? Can I see it by myself? And obviously it takes time because the book has almost 800 pages, so it's long book in itself. And then if you do this work, when you read it and when you do this introspective, but it takes even more time. So it took, I don't know, months maybe to read it. But then it was really a very deep and rich read, and I enjoyed very much. And you say in your book, and I also listen to the talks you do, and you say that consciousness is fundamental and everything else is virtual. And
That's
at
right.
the beginning, it's like, what? Especially coming from a scientist, like what is this book is going to be about? But when you start to read it and you realize, oh, that's really, as you say, it's really very logically written. It's not about just those philosophical, ideas about life, but you go in there as a scientist, and when you look for proof that what you say is what you find. So how would you mind to tell a little bit more about this? Consciousness is fundamental and everything else is virtual.
Yes. Well, this is kind of the big paradigm shift that this book brings. And there's actually several paradigm shifts in there. And it's difficult for most people to kind of get their mind wrapped around it in the beginning. And it takes some time before it actually sinks in, because paradigm shifts are hard. Paradigm shift means you just have to shift your whole perspective about how the world is and how it works and why it works that way. And we have perspectives that we've gotten from our culture of how the world works, and this is very different than that. And it's so different that a lot of people just can't, get it. But once you do get it, everything gets simple. Now, with that, if you have that understanding, everything in your life and in science and everything else just gets real simple, and you understand things much better than you did before. Well, one should have expected a very big paradigm shift. It has to be a big paradigm shift because scientists knew in the early 1920s, which is 100 years ago, a century ago, is when the first double slit experiments were performed. And that experiment basically showed scientists that the world is not physical. It's not, matter-based. It's probability-based. And the scientists rubbing their head, what does that mean? It's probability-based. I don't know how to interpret that, And that was the beginning of quantum physics as a weird science because it wasn't matter-based. So they knew at that time that reality was not, material, and that the materialist viewpoint was wrong. But they couldn't find any other model or any other way of understanding that. It just seemed strange and weird, but nobody could come up with an idea of how to explain that. Well, in the beginning, the scientists were really excited. Wow, we have materialism's wrong. There's a whole new, better viewpoint of the world. And then decades went by and no progress and couldn't figure out any good solutions. So people stopped working on it and they stopped doing that. And they started instead saying things like, well, we'll never know. It's just a secret that we can never know, and they gave up looking. So right away that this shift in perspective, this paradigm shift, is going to have to be a really, really big shift. Because for 100 years, the brightest minds of the scientists have just been unable to figure out what that shift is. Well, if it was just a little shift, just a little different, just seeing things a little different way, well, we would have gotten to it long ago. It's a really big change in the way that you understand the world. And it would have to be a really kind of wild and crazy thing for it to possibly be true. Otherwise, the scientists would have figured it out in a century. So yes, it is kind of wild and crazy when you first approach it. And what it says is that consciousness is fundamental. That means it is the fundamental thing in our reality. And everything else is a derivative, really, of consciousness. Now, what that means is that we, you and I, and all the other people in this world, we are really pieces of consciousness. We are players in a virtual reality game. Our bodies are the avatars. And now right away people go, whoa, that's strange. But it's not so strange actually when you see how well that models what we have. So consciousness is the real thing. And consciousness created this virtual reality for us to play in, for us to make choices in. It helps consciousness evolve. Consciousness evolves. That's kind of a long story, and I don't want to take up too much of your time about parenting here, so I'll try to make it short. But consciousness evolves by lowering its entropy. Lowering its entropy means making things more efficient, more effective, works better, more valuable. And consciousness created subsets of itself, which I call individuated units of consciousness, that are us. We're just pieces of this consciousness. So that old thing about we're all one, well, that's really true. We really are all one. Consciousness is a single thing, but it's made subsets of itself. And just like in a computer, you can have a computer make kind of smaller computers inside the big computer. And what I mean, they call those virtual machines. That way, 100 people can work on a great big mainframe all at once. And each one thinks they're just working on their own little computer. Those are called virtual machines. So a big computer can configure itself to look like a whole bunch of little computers, And the consciousness system is an information system. Now, I define consciousness as awareness with a choice. Simple definition. Most all the consciousness researchers are running around saying, we really don't know what consciousness is. Consciousness is really mysterious, and it's not all that complicated. It's really simple. It's just awareness with a choice. And that choice means free will choice, because if it's not a free will choice, it's not a choice at all. There are no choices. If it's deterministic and not free will, then there are no choices. Everything's determined. So consciousness with a choice created individuated units of consciousness, all with free will, and they interact, and you have a social system. And the low entropy, the optimization for lower entropy in a social system is that all the pieces of the social system cooperate and care about each other and take care of each other. That gives you the optimal social system. The opposite of that is where all the members of the social system are all in it for themselves. Everything's for me. And that just creates chaos and higher entropy. Entropy, I should say, is a measure of order. It's a measure of complexity, and more order than you have lower entropy. So awareness with a choice. Well, awareness, what does that mean? Awareness means you get information. What are you aware of? Well, that's information. And now that you have the information, you have to understand it. So you have to process it to see, is this valuable information or what? And then when you process it and see, you have to have some measure by which to know whether you want to go more of that or less of that. So you need a purpose. And the purpose is lowering entropy, more order. If all the bits in an information system are random, there's no information. So information itself requires an ordering of the bits. And if that information is more meaningful and more useful, then it's lower entropy. You can do more with it, you see. So consciousness is all about awareness. Awareness is about information and processing information, assessing information. Consciousness is an information system. So that's the idea. So now we are the players. We are pieces of consciousness playing an avatar, which are our physical bodies. Just like The Sims or the World of Warcraft or No Man's Sky, all these virtual reality games, we're just like that. We're the player. Now, the interesting thing about that is that from inside a virtual reality, let's say you're in the Sims game. If you're a character in the Sims game, you can't find the computer inside your game because the computer has to be outside of the virtual reality because the computer's creating the virtual reality. You see? So the computer has to be non-physical to the characters, to the avatars inside the Sims game. And the player also has to be outside. The player makes all the choices for the avatar. The avatar is just a drawn thing. It's just, computed. It's a computed thing. So it doesn't have any memory. It doesn't have any consciousness. It doesn't have anything. It's just computed. So they have to have the player make all the choices. And the player has to be also non-physical and outside because the player is always communicating with the computer. The player and the computer have to be in the same reality because they're in a constant dialogue with each other. And you can't do that across reality frames. You have to be in the same reality frame. So the player is also consciousness, a subset of consciousness. There's another part of consciousness that configures itself as the computer, which becomes the server. So now from the avatar's viewpoint, that's from the viewpoint of our bodies, both the player and the computer are non-physical, and they're both consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. So you see, everything basically comes from consciousness. And believe it or not, once you understand consciousness, you can derive physics from that consciousness. So that theory of consciousness. So that's kind of the idea that we live in a virtual reality. And now the model has reasons of why, where does the virtual reality come from? Why does the system build the virtual reality? Well, if you evolve by caring and cooperating, because that's the low entropy way of interacting in a social system, then it's all this evolution is about making good choices, low entropy choices, caring choices, loving choices. So why are we here? We're here to grow up and become love, increase the quality of our consciousness. And how do we do that? By making choices that are low entropy. In other words, making choices that are caring, that are cooperative, that are sharing, not choices that are self-centered, not choices based on fear, but choices based on love. So that's our purpose for being here. So we needed this virtual reality to give us a place where we would have lots of interesting choices that mattered, ethical choices, meaningful choices, choices of interaction, where who we are, we interact with other people, and it shows us the quality of the choices we're making. So it's a great schoolhouse to be in. So this virtual reality is an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. And it was not programmed. Our virtual reality is not a programmed reality. It was an evolved reality. And everybody will recognize that in the sense that you evolve a virtual reality by coming up with a set of initial conditions and a rule set. And then you punch the run button, and the initial conditions will change according to the rules. And then you just let that happen, just let that evolve. Well, what are the initial conditions? Small ball of plasma, high temperature, high pressure. And when you push the button, it expands because it's high pressure, high temperature. And the rule set is what? Science. It's physics. It's chemistry. It's biology. That's what scientists do. They dig out the rules of the rule set. So you recognize that as the Big Bang. The cosmology that physicists favor now, the Big Bang. It started with this ball of plasma. Of course, The physicist can't tell you where that ball of plasma comes from. That's another one of those paradoxes. Well, we know there was this ball of plasma, but we have no idea where that came from because it couldn't come from our universe because our universe hadn't happened yet, hadn't evolved yet. So it is just a big digital bang. It's a simulation in a computer with an initial conditions and a rule set. And eventually that simulation, that virtual reality, turned into what we call our physical universe. And there were these entities that were calculated in this virtual reality called human beings, and they made lots of very interesting, dramatic, ethical, moral choices. And the players, pieces of consciousness, could then make all the choices for that player. Okay, and by doing that, they could grow up, because otherwise they're just consciousness talking to other consciousness, and there's really nothing there that's very significant going on. It's a big chat room where they're all just chatting to each other, and growth is hard to come by because you don't have very meaningful choices to make. You don't have a lot of challenge there. So this virtual reality gives us lots of challenges, lots of things that we have to do right. Otherwise, it causes trouble for ourselves. So that's why we needed the virtual reality. That's who we are. We're consciousness. We're immortal. And those avatars are just, drawn on the canvas, so to speak. They're just computed. And solve so many problems in psychology and biology and sociology. Once you get that, then all these paradoxes just kind of melt away. And it doesn't add any new paradoxes. So that's kind of the idea. I've tried to make it short, but
I know this. I mean, that topic is not easy itself, so it's hard to do it very, to explain it in just a few seconds. But the way I understand it, so there was consciousness, and then it got located into different life forms, shapes, entities, and the rest is just evolution. So we got through life, and then we gathered more information in order to survive, adapt, and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And then the problem, I guess, comes, and then we can touch this parenting topic, as we are all just interpreters, I guess, of our information as how we see it and how we perceive it. Then problem we are having in relationship is that we see or receive different information, and then we interpret it differently. So it's like having, seeing the same information but interpreting it differently, or even gathering different information. And when we have this information conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. So when, if you think of the idea that you are a piece of consciousness and you're getting a data stream from the computer, okay? Just like you're a player. If you're a player in a video game, you get a data stream from the computer. And that data stream is a bunch of points of light that you see on your screen. And you interpret those points of light as your reality, as something, that virtual reality. All those points of light look like rivers and streams and people and, chairs and everything in your reality. You interpret from those dots of light. And this is the same way. So we're a piece of consciousness, and we're getting a stream of data, and we interpret that data to be our reality. And however we interpret it, that is our reality. And how we interpret it is based on our previous experience. It's based on our knowledge. It's based on our experience. It's based on our fear, on our beliefs, on who we are. That's how we interpret it. So everybody actually lives in their own personal reality. Now, like a multiplayer game, like The Sims, a lot of different players are in there at the same time, and they can interact with each other. And the computer tells you, the results of your interactions and so on. It does that. So there's a lot in the game that we agree about, There's a lot in the game. This is a table, and we all look at the table and we all agree, yes, that's a table. It's made out of wood. It's brown. So we can all see that because the computer will send everybody there that same data with that table. But we all actually see that table a little differently. Now, something that is part of our common experience, we tend to see it about the same. So all of us know about tables. So we all really agree about that because that's a piece of our experience. And there's nothing too mysterious about that. But there's a lot of things in life that are not that obvious as what is a table. And when we talk about relationships and understanding what another person is thinking or feeling and how they're interacting and how you're interacting with them, well, now there's a lot of unknowns. It's not a table anymore. It's something that has got a lot of uncertainty about it. And we tend to make up a story that sounds good to us of what's going on. And then we believe that story and we think that is that's the reality. And it's not at all. It's just our interpretation of the reality. And that other person has their own interpretation of reality. One good example of this is, there was a book written, I don't know, a decade or so ago, said men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Mm-hmm. And the book just pointed out the fact that males and females interpret the world differently. And that's a big problem between the genders because, males will say one sort of thing with this in mind and females will interpret it in a different way, and vice versa. Females will be saying something and the men will interpret it in a different way. And we have to realize that people are just who they are. They're different. And it's not just men and women, it's everybody, everybody. And once we understand that, it makes us be less judgmental. We stop judging people because they're not the way we think they should be. And we realize that's us. That's our own kind of self-centered view of the world. We live at the center of our own universe, and we have to just let people be who they are and not come to judgments about, oh, well, that was, they're not very nice or they're this or they're that. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe we just don't understand. Mm-hmm. And maybe we should take a little more time to be open-minded and try to understand. And this is a very important part of the parenting thing is, we have children, and if you think it's a big difference between men and women as far as what they understand and, and whatever, then there's a much bigger gap between, adults and children. What the children understand and the way they interpret the world is very, very different than the way we interpret the world. Yet we treat them like they see the same world we do. And they don't. They don't see the same world we do. They see they live in a very different space. And you need to appreciate the space that they're in. Otherwise, you'll do some things that do some harm to those kids. You'll make them very insecure. If you are not aware of their view of things, and something that seems to us so trivial, like you come home and you have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. So you buy your 3-year-old a teddy bear and you give it to them. And you didn't buy your 7-year-old a teddy bear because 7-year-olds are kind of done with teddy bears and they're not that big a deal. But your 7-year-old feels very left out. Feels like you got their younger sibling something, but they didn't get something for you. And suddenly they start feeling inadequate. They weren't good enough to deserve a present. And from the parents' view, nothing really serious happened there. You just gave one of them a teddy bear because that seemed appropriate. And if teddy bear was on sale and you said, oh, Sally will like this teddy bear, I'll get that for him. And you were on your way home and you weren't there to do shopping and whatever. So the parent doesn't have any idea, but that child that didn't get the teddy bear might, for the rest of his life, feel inadequate. So there's a little simple something that from the parent's viewpoint was nothing. Oh, it's not a big deal. You don't want teddy bears anyway. You're out of that. And I found this teddy bear on sale, and I didn't get you one because I know that's not where you're headed. You're just leaving that realm and going into other things. But from the child's viewpoint, something very serious happened, and children are just learning kind of who they are, what they are, and how they're regarded, and they only know that by how people treat them. And if they happen to be right at a critical point in their own putting together their own who am I, well, right there, yeah, they didn't get the teddy bear. They're not as valuable. And they don't appreciate the big picture of mom was busy, found the sale, was on her way home, all of that they don't understand. All they know is mom decided not to get them something. So we have to be aware of how children see the world and be very careful that we don't do damage by being thoughtless. And it doesn't mean that mom always has to bring a teddy bear to all of her children if she gives one to any. It just means she has to be aware of that, and she gives the little one the teddy bear and then picks up the other one and gives him a big hug and tells him how wonderful they are. That's all. It's not like mom has to buy everybody the same present, all the time, no matter how old they are. It just means that you have to be aware of their feelings and give them, maybe it's just a hug, maybe it's just a smile, or maybe just an I love you or something. And that just fixes it. You see? So it's those
Right.
those kinds of awarenesses that we need to know. And the problem is that we tend to be kind of self-centered. Most of us are pretty much about ourselves. We see things, we live in our own reality, we have our own issues, and we're very much do things and want things that are good for us. And we think we're doing things for other people, and sometimes we are, but more often we're doing things because we think we should. It's our duty, it's our job. And we just want to get done with it so that we can do something that we really want to do. We got to wash those dishes. We got to clean this. We got to do that. We got to change diapers. We have all these things we need to do. And we see that as our obligation. And when we see it as our obligation, then as time goes by, that tends to fester, and you start to feel like I do everything, I have all these things to do, and I do more than anybody else. And you start feeling negativity because you're doing things because you think you should. You need to do things because it's the right thing to do, not do them because you'd feel bad if you didn't. And people would say, oh, you're not a good mom, you're not doing the job. You do things because that's what you want to do. That's what you need to do. It has to come from a positive place, not from a begrudging, yeah, I'll do it because I have to, because that makes a huge difference. Now, as far as actions go, there's no difference in the actions. You see the person, then they're doing the job. You really can't tell where they're coming from. But what's important in life isn't so much what we do, is why we do it. It's the intent we have when we do it. So when you are interacting with your child and you're doing all the right things, but your intention is more self-centered, your child is going to grow up to be insecure. Your child is going to feel all of that because children take in a lot of information and understand it very well long before they can speak and give any information back. And we kind of have this idea that if they can't speak, then they're not really getting anything. They only very vaguely understand language, so they really don't know what's going on. Well, that's just not true. They know a lot of what's going on. They pick up all those attitudes. They know whether the things you're doing for them and just around the house, whether you're doing that because you feel you should or because you want to. They know the difference. You might not even be aware of the difference, but they are.
Exactly.
They understand all kinds of things about your feelings. And if you go to put them to bed and you have this feeling that, oh, I just need Susie to go to sleep because I just need some peace and quiet and I have these other things I need to get done. And come on, Susie, just go to sleep. They feel that you are pushing them away and you are done with them for a while and you want to get rid of them. They get all that. And you're just thinking, well, I'm just doing it for Susie because, of course, children need to sleep. Rest is part of their thing. But you're really doing it for yourself because you want to be doing something else. You don't want to be taking care of that child anymore. You want that child to be asleep. And yes, you've got a good reason that children need to sleep. But if your central motivation is about you, the child knows that. Now, if your central motivation is about them, oh, Susie needs to sleep. You know, her health and her good, you know, her ability to grow depends on getting sleep. And if that's your thing, then you probably stay in there with Susie and hold her hand, or you know, talk with her, or read her a story, because her sleeping is really what it's all about, not you getting away. You see, so those things make a big difference to children, and they're very much aware of all of that. I remember watching a video on YouTube. It was very funny, and the lady who took it, I'm sure, just wanted to, you know, share. But she had a little boy, and the little boy was probably, oh, I don't know, around 2 years old, and he was a toddler. And the lady would be standing in the room, and the little boy would come toddling into the room, go right to her feet, fall down on the floor, and start crying and screaming. He wanted his mother's attention. And he had learned that when you scream, you get your mother's attention. Well, mom wasn't around, so he had to find mom. So, oh, there's mom. And he walks over, throws himself onto the floor, and starts screaming. So mom just walks away, and she walks to another room. And the little boy, as soon as he notices that she's gone, stops screaming, just like that, on a dime. Beep, no more crying. Gets up, looks around. Oh, there's mom. And he toddles over to mom, gets to her feet, throws himself on the floor, and starts screaming. Well, then mom turns around and walks to another room. And as soon as mom takes 2 steps away and she's gone, screaming stops, just like that. Child gets up, you know, follows his mom, gets to her feet, throws himself on the floor, and starts screaming. Well, obviously, this child would like some attention from his mom. And he doesn't have any reason to cry or scream other than that's what gets him attention from his mom. So, you know, you realize that you create that. You create that scenario that your child has to holler and scream to get your attention. And, you know, instead, when the child comes toddling towards you, before they throw themselves on the floor and start screaming, you pick them up and give them a big hug and give them some attention. And then maybe instead of crying to get your attention, they'll just follow you around. Well, that's better. And then when you have time, you take time to give them some attention, even if it's just 5 seconds. Just pick them up for 5 seconds, tell them you love them, rub their head, and drop them on the floor again. You know, that's all. Just walking between the stove and the refrigerator, you know, that little bit of whatever is enough. It makes a huge difference. But if it's all about us, then we don't do that because that's in our way. We want to do this. We have to make dinner. We have to do other things. We've got things to do. So this you know, this idea that we're all consciousness, we're all, you know, pieces of consciousness playing these avatars. If you think about that, you've got a little piece of consciousness here who's very aware of what you do and why you do it.
Especially why.
Yeah, why you do it. They know. If it's about them and you're there because you care about them, they know that. And if it's about themselves, they know that too, that they're an inconvenience right now. It doesn't mean that you don't love them. It just means that you're self-centered to the point that you need to do the things that you need to do, and the baby gets in the way. So you put the baby down, or you know, you ignore the baby, and you tell them, Shh, be quiet. There's no need to cry. You don't have anything. Or I'll give you, be quiet, or I'll give you something to cry about. We threaten them. And, we talk about older kids now, not babies. That's the way an awful lot of children grow up. They grow up in that if they're good, they get ignored because mom and dad are busy. If they're not good and they're bad, they get in trouble. They get hollered at. So their whole life is one of two things. They get ignored and they get hollered at. That's their life. Because if they're good, the adults are saying, oh, they're playing nice together now. Okay, let's just, now we can get our things done, because the parents are self-centered and need to get their things done. So the children, their life, the way they see adults and adult life is that they're either hollered at or they're ignored. Well, when that's your life, you feel very insecure. That doesn't give you a warm feeling of worth. That makes you feel worthless. And you go and try to interact. Oh, I'm going to go interact with dad or mom. And they say, not now, I'm busy. But go over and play with your sister. I'm busy now. Well, you're ignored. You're not wanted. And yes, some of that children need to deal with, but if that's their constant life, you're going to affect, and you don't mean to. You're being a good parent. You're giving them a nice warm house. You're you're putting them in good schools. You're buying them the things they need, and you're taking care of them, you think, but you're not really paying attention to them in a way that they need. And they don't need a lot. They can understand that you're busy, but they just don't want to be pushed away. They can understand you're busy and they can leave you alone and appreciate that. But they have to also feel cared for and that they're loved and that they're valued and that the parents want them to be around. So, yeah, it's understanding that you are awareness and that each little awareness is evolving and making choices and understanding the world and coming up in their own mind with their own reality. They're not in your reality, they're in their own reality. And you have to think, what is their reality like? How do they see the world? And they don't see it at all like mom and dad sees it. They see it from a totally different viewpoint.
I really love this metaphor about different virtual reality, because we often argue not about the physical life, but about the life that we perceive. And emotions are about our way to perceive life. I'm sad because I understand, I think, I perceive that what's happening, it's sad for me. And so I'm crying. And if I tell to my child, don't cry, or, why'd you cry? It's no big deal, just get over it. That means that I am denying the way he perceives life. So I'm in my own bubble, he's on his own bubble. I'm living in my virtual reality, he's in his own virtual reality, but we don't communicate.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We tend to be self-centered, which means it's about us, and we see that what we know and understand, we understand what would be good for everybody. We know how everybody should be. We know how our children should be. We know how our husbands and wives should be. We know how our in-laws and our parents, we know how everybody in the world should be. And we are certain that if they would just be the way we want them to be, everything would be terrific. But of course, everybody feels that way. Every individual feels that they know, what would be best for everyone else. And they don't realize that each of them are in their own reality, living their own life in their own way. And they have emotions, they have feelings, they get upset, they get angry. But that anger is a choice. They choose to be angry. And they'll point their finger at somebody else and say, you make me angry. But nobody can make you angry. You choose to be angry. And you get angry because of a fear that you have, because somebody said something that triggers one of your fears, and your response to that is to get angry, you see. So, yes, we all live in our own reality. We all have our own emotions, and we all believe that we know what's best for everybody else. And of course, that just doesn't work. It's so much better if you realize that other people just are who they are. Let them be how they are. Don't wish them to be different. Don't want to change them. Don't try to change them. Learn how to be positive with them just the way they are. And if there's negatives in there, well, let those go. They're not that important. Ignore the negatives and just interact with the positives. Don't push their buttons. Avoid their buttons. Don't set them off by saying things that you know are going to be upsetting to them. And in that way, you can have a good, positive relationship with almost anybody. You know, even people that now you don't like so much. You know, people at the office you don't really get along with. You can have good relationship with them if you just let them be and stop judging them according to what you think, you know, how you think they should be. They shouldn't be like that. They shouldn't say things like that. They shouldn't have that attitude. And now we get upset about what they should and shouldn't have. That's us judging them according to our reality and the way we feel. And of course, they are probably judging us, you know, according to what their reality is. And you just have a lot of people all fussing and fighting and fuming with each other all the time because they just don't understand reality and how it works, and that we're all different. We need to just accept that. Let people be different. Everybody is on doing the best they can with what they've got to work with. And what they've got to work with is a lot of beliefs and fears and things that they learned in childhood and adulthood, and that's what makes them the way they are. That's what makes them insecure. Well, when you're insecure, you can express that in two ways. You can express it in being a shrinking violet that just doesn't say much and shrinks off to the side. But that's not the way most people express it. When you're insecure, most people express it by being belligerent, by being tough, by being, this is my way or the highway. And you know, you become arrogant and forceful, and other people need to do it your way because your way is right. And that's the way people hide their feelings of being insecure, by being blustery. It denies the insecurity. So that's kind of the way most people deal with it. And of course, it's just the thing that will annoy and bother somebody else who also is self-centered, because that, you know, what you're doing and your feelings are just not the way they see the world. So, yes, let people be. Let them be who they are, and don't impose your view of the world on everybody else. Just make sure that the things that you do are good things, are low entropy things, which means you don't get angry, because everything negative is a low entropy bad thing. Once you get rid of your fear, you no longer get angry. You no longer get upset. You no longer feel used and abused and unsatisfied and not treated well. All of that stuff just disappears when your fears disappear. You know, you see things differently, and you take responsibility for yourself. If you start to get angry, you realize that's you, not them. You are getting angry because they are triggering one of your fears. You need to get rid of that fear. You need to not be triggered like that. You need to let them be the way they are and make it so you're impossible to trigger. Nothing can trigger you. If somebody's rude to you, you think, gee, they must really be having a hard day, because they must be feeling really miserable for them to be kind of rude like that. I wonder if there's anything I could say to help them out. So instead of getting angry, you feel compassion for people who are rude to you, because you know they're having a hard time, and they're upset. Their ego and their fear is giving them a hard time. So you either just get out of the way or you see if you can be helpful. But you
I
don't start fussing at them, because that's just throwing gasoline on a fire that's already burning, and it just makes everything worse.
I love that, especially coming from a scientist. That's so true. And I have one more question for you. It's about your own journey. What did you find the most difficult part for yourself on this, consciousness journey? What do you find the most difficult in your relationship? What is the most difficult to accept? What's the most difficult to love in the way others perceive the reality?
Yeah. Well, of course, the people that we're closest to are the people that will push our buttons. They're the people that will challenge us more than any others. You have people that you work with at the office. Well, they can be this way or that way. We can get along with them. In order to get the work done, everybody can get along. We've learned how to do that. That's not a big problem. But it's the person that is very special to you. It's the spouse. It's the parents. It's the children. It's the people that you hold dear, the people that you're close to. That's the big challenge, because those people can push your buttons and can get you, out of sorts and upset or angry better than anybody else in the world. So these close relationships, we need to look at them as learning opportunities. And the thing that I've had probably the most trouble with is probably a similar thing that many people do, and that is to just let people be. I have a problem with trying to help everyone. Not necessarily fix everyone, but trying to help everyone. And if that help is asked for, well, then it's a really good thing. But if that help isn't asked for, it can just get in the way and make everything worse. So it's hard for me, if I see somebody and they're having a problem, to not just step in and try to fix it and make it better. And I have to learn to just let people struggle with their own issues and their own problems and don't become a part of it. Just let it work out. They will learn from their own choices, and I don't have to help that process. I am not everybody's teacher, that sort of thing, just to let people be on their own. So if you see somebody, and if I see my wife and she's trying to get a lid off the jar, instead of just going over and taking the jar away from her and taking the lid off, I'll wait for her to ask me if she wants me to help her, you see. Because if I just go take the jar out of her hands and take the lid off, being helpful, well, what I've done is I've made her feel inadequate. I've made her feel like she can't do things. I've made her feel bad. And she'll be annoyed with me, but she probably won't say anything until I've done 10 things like that. And then snap, she's had it. So it's hard, though. You see somebody and they're struggling. You just want to fix it for them. You just want to take the problem away, and that is not helpful. You have to let people have their problems. You have to let people deal with the things they have to deal with. And if they want to ask for help, then you can be helpful. But if they don't want to ask for help, then leave them alone. Let them struggle. And so I find that kind of a challenge, to just let people be who they are. And you see that somebody you love and somebody that you care about is doing something that isn't going to work. It's doing something that's actually may even hurt them. It's something that's a problem. And if it's going to hurt them really badly, like they're about to cut their finger off or something, well, of course you say something. But if it isn't going to be a big disaster, then you just butt out and let it go, and don't try to step in and say, that would work better if you do it this way. If you did this other way and you did this, it'd be a lot more efficient. Just because you know that, well, that's your opinion. That's the way you see the world. That's the way you would do it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way they're going to do it. And if they do something that's inefficient or something that causes a problem, and that's just the way they do it, then let it be. Let it be that way.
That's so hard to do. I mean, to most of us, it's so hard not to get involved, to just observe and wait for a
Yeah.
sign. We just want to dive in and do stuff instead of people. Would you
Yes.
mind telling us where people can find you and, and enjoy more of what you are saying? Because I could listen to you for hours, I think.
Well, yes. You can find me, of course, at my website, and in another, hopefully, couple of months, I'll have a whole new website that'll be much
Oh,
better than the one I have now. I'm in the process of getting a new one made, but right now you can still find all about me and about the books and that sort of thing on my website, which is www.my-big-toe.com. Okay, that's my website. Now, if you want to see where I might be talking, where I'm going, do I have events, do you want to buy a product or something, then you would go to www.mbtevents.com. And that's Donna and Keith, who you interacted with to set up this interview. And they basically put everything up on YouTube for me. Keith does all the editing of all my videos, and they're just my right-hand people that do an awful lot of the work, and they do it all for free. That's just something they want to do. And that site will take you to, say, an audio program that will teach you how to do all the paranormal things. Because as it turns out in this model, all those paranormal things are just normal things. They're normal to the intuitive side of a person. They all happen on the intuitive side. None of them will happen on the intellectual side. So you can get into those sorts of things there. There's a thing called Tom's Park, and that's for people who really have trouble with meditation. If you've tried and tried meditation and it just doesn't seem to work for you because you're just a very logical left brain type that just, has a hard time doing intuitive things, then you can get around the need to meditate with the Tom's Park and use your imagination instead. Practice with your imagination, and it will end up taking you the same place. So there's those kinds of things that are available. And on YouTube, I have literally several thousand videos on YouTube, and a few of them are short, like 10, 15, 20 minutes, but most of them are long, like an hour and a half, 2 hours. These are when I go out and give a presentation someplace, people buy tickets, people pay to do that. And sometimes it's even expensive if it's some place we're doing in some resort somewhere and it lasts for 3 or 4 days and, all meals are included. So sometimes people are paying $2,000 and things to do those. I like to get video of them and put it all out on YouTube for free so that if you're just patient, you can kind of be there by watching the video of what happened, what I said, what were the questions, what were my answers. What you can't do is ask your own question because it's just a video. But so there's lots and lots of hours of video there. And I have at my website, you can get a little search tool that if you put in a subject, it'll search through all the thousands of hours of video and come back with, what video should you watch and at what minute. Go to that minute in that video and actually give you a link. That'll pop you to that minute in that video. So I have that. And in another couple of weeks, I'm going to have a talking head AI that will be able to discuss with you MBT and be able to talk with you. And basically, it's been trained on all of those thousands of hours of video, and it will react accordingly. It'll be somewhat like talking with me, but of course, it's just an AI, and AIs can sometimes make big mistakes and say things that are wrong and so on. You'll have to be aware, But then you should always be aware. You shouldn't do anything that I say just because I say it anyway. You need to own it. You need to do it because you think it's the right idea. So this will be, you'll be able to have conversations with that rather than just a search tool. It'll be a tool that you can sit down and have a conversation with about topics. And it will very closely, we're getting better and better with it, it'll very closely represent the kind of things that I would say if you and I were having a conversation. So that's going to be kind of neat. And in a couple of weeks, I think we'll have that. So we have all these things available. Of course, there's books, and you can get the books. Most places you can find books. You can, if you go to a bookstore, they ought to be able to order them if they don't have them. And if you go to a place like Amazon, you'll be able to find them there. So the books are big and they're thick. They're, I think, like it's 850 pages,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, it's a really big book. But don't let that worry you. Take a year to read it. Take time. Just go through it a little bit at a time, and that's the go through, read a few pages, and then take 2 or 3, 4 days to think about it. And then read another few pages. That's really the way to get through it, because it's not a story. Well, the first section is. The first section story just about me and how I came to write the books and so on. And you can just read that like you read any book. But then once it gets into the detailed explanation of how reality works, it's better just to do a short bit at a time. So don't be frightened by a book that's that fat. It's logical and it's rational. And it's a read that is easier for people who are very logical. If you tend to be a left brain, logical process type of person, then you'll find that the My Big Toe books are not that hard to read because they're very logical books. They were written by a physicist. They tend to be rational. If you're very right-brained and don't do logic very well, you just grasp whole ideas without really thinking about the processes behind them, you may find the books more difficult. But still, if you go through them slowly, they will, you can learn from them. And it's good to read the books more than once. When you read it the second and third time, you'll find things that you swear were never there when you read it the first time, because you have changed. By the time you read these books, if you're really paying attention, you will be different by the end. You will be a changed person. And when you read it again, that changed person will pick up on things that just kind of slip right by you the first time. So yeah, I know some people read it like 6, 7, 8 times, and they still find new things in it when they read it that they just missed before. They weren't ready for. So there you can find all that. There's a lot of things about me, and most of it's all free. A few
Thank
things
you.
aren't, but most of it is.
Thank you for doing all of that. I mean, putting all that free stuff online, and then also with artificial intelligence future, I really want to try it to see how it works. So I'm going to put all that links that you mentioned in the notes, so it would be easier for people to just click on and go directly to your website. So thank you again, and have a lovely day. It's still midday to where you are. It's already night here. So have a lovely day. I'm gonna see all of you next week. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Renata. It's a pleasure being here, and for the work you do, it's very, very important. And I really appreciate people like you who spend their time talking to people, helping people see bigger pictures, help their understanding, because there isn't anything more important that I can think of other than being good parents, raising healthy children who are really well put together. They're not insecure. They're not angry. They're not hurtful. Great to raise children who have that kind of a good, positive attitude is not necessarily an easy thing to do in our world today. That's so busy, where everybody has lots of things to do. It's a difficult thing to be a good parent. It's not an easy thing. It's a hard thing, but you'll be a lot better at it if you try to be better at it. And you're making people aware that they need to try to be better at it. And I think that's wonderful. So it's a pleasure to share some time with you and talk to your audience.
Thank you. Thank you.